The whole family mocked him for accepting a worthless rock in the middle of nowhere, and now they regret it. A lonely old veteran took his coat, his last bit of pride, and moved to a frozen sea ledge off Alaska with only his German shepherd for company. But when that loyal dog started clawing at the stone hearth in the dead of winter, they uncovered a hidden chamber under the house, and with it a secret Cold War listening station that powerful men would kill to control. What they awakened in that rock would expose a traitor, stop a silent enemy beneath the waves, and give the veteran a purpose he thought he'd lost forever. Before we dive in, tell us where you're watching from. Drop your city, state, or country in the comments below. It's always incredible to see how far these stories travel. A slate-gray winter sky pressed low over Seattle, swallowing warmth and sound alike. Inside a high-rise law firm overlooking the harbor, the air smelled of lemon polish, old papers, and a chill far deeper than the December cold outside. Henry Cole sat stiffly in a leather chair that looked far too polished for a man like him. Nearly 70, his back had a noticeable curve, less from age and more from too many years bent under the invisible weight of war. He wore a heavy red and black buffalo plaid flannel coat, the kind that had seen more campfires and trenches than cocktail parties. His hair was cropped short, once coal-black now, an unrepentant silver, and his face was carved with the kind of lines that only sleepless nights and buried memories can cut. A neatly trimmed gray beard framed his jaw, but the softness that might have once lived in his expression had been sanded away, leaving only a rugged kindness in his weary blue eyes. Those eyes stayed fixed straight ahead, as if watching some internal battlefield flicker back to life behind them. Across the desk lounged Derek Cole, Henry's cousin, though neither man liked to claim the relation. Derek was in his mid-40s, his cheeks plump and rosy, like a man who had never known hunger or fear. His dark hair gelled into perfection, contrasted sharply with the strained buttons of his designer suit. The suit clung too tightly around his belly, as though even the fabric itself resented the greed it wrapped around. Derek wore a smirk that seemed tattooed onto his fleshy face, and the cologne he'd drenched himself in was so thick it nearly masked the scent of wealth embedded in the mahogany walls. Unlike Henry, who had learned discipline, duty, and empathy through scars, Derek's personality had been shaped by inheritance and entitlement. He didn't work for power. He simply assumed the world owed it to him. Standing behind an enormous desk was Mr. Whitmore, the family attorney, a brittle man with the aesthetic of skeleton and parchment combined. He had a bald crown fringed with white wisps and glasses that eternally slid toward the tip of his nose. His voice cracked like dry leaves as he spoke, reading from the final will and testament of the late Julian Cole, Henry's grandfather. Whitmore's tone carried no emotion, but with each line Henry felt the noose of family history tighten around the room. Julian Cole had been a stern man, hard as the seas of Alaska where he spent most of his life. Henry remembered him vaguely, oil-stained hands guiding a young boy through a harbor thick with fog, a voice like gravel encouraging courage without ever speaking the word love. There had been a falling out, a brutal one, after Henry enlisted in the Marines at 18. Julian believed in service, yes, but not in sending his only grandson into the machine of war. The resulting silence between them stretched years until Julian's death. And to Derek Cole, Whitmore continued the estate at Greenridge, all remaining company shares, bank accounts, and the collection of vintage automobiles. Derek's grin widened greedily. His fingers tapped on the polished wood, impatient to sign papers that would make him richer than he already pretended to be. Henry's jaw tightened, though he remained motionless, every muscle locked in a soldier's discipline. And finally the lawyer said, voice lowering to Henry Cole. Derek chuckled under his breath, ready to mock. The property known as Raven Ledge, a private rock outcropping, with a residence approximately 25 miles off the coast of Sitka, Alaska. Along with the dog currently in residence, a 5-year-old German shepherd named Scout. Derek snorted aloud. A rock and a mutt. Truly fitting for the family disappointment. Henry did not react, not outwardly. But inside something twisted, not anger, not humiliation, but an ache he knew all too well. He'd lost friends in deserts and jungles. He'd lost sleep and peace and pieces of himself. He had not expected anything from this will, yet the smallness of the bequest still stung. Whitmore adjusted his glasses again. There is a final note from Mr. Julian Cole. His eyes met Henry's, and for the first time the old lawyer seemed genuinely human. He read slowly. Raven Ledge is given to Henry because he alone knows the value of a silent watch. Silent watch. The phrase struck Henry like a flashbang in a dark room. It was military language. It was the memory of nights spent in foreign sands, staring into shadow that might shift into death. It was the unspoken duty, the burden of vigilance carried by those who return, but never truly come home. Henry's breath caught. For the first time in decades, he felt seen. Derek scoffed loudly. A poetic way to say the old man went senile. Unless he sneered, he buried treasure on that useless hunk of frozen rock. Better start digging, soldier boy. Henry finally looked at him, blue eyes turning cold and sharp. Not angry, just done. I'm sorry for your loss, Henry said stiffly to the lawyer rising on creaking knees. He didn't acknowledge Derek again. He walked out with the heavy dignity of a flag still standing after the battle has ended. The winter wind hit his face the moment he stepped onto the street. His red and black flannel fluttered behind him like a wounded banner still determined to fly. He had no mansion, no fortune. But he had something else, a final message from a man who had once loved him in silence. A mission, maybe. A place where the noise in his head might finally quiet. A reason to go on. Days later, after selling nearly everything he owned except essentials, Henry drove his rusty pickup north. The miles unfurled under his tires like a long farewell to civilization. Forests thickened, towns thinned, and the ocean air grew sharper. Memories rose and fell like tide's bootsteps in sand. A friend's scream cut short medals that never filled the emptiness behind them. By the time he reached Sitka, Alaska, winter had entirely consumed the world. The harbor was a landscape of ice-tipped waves and seagulls crying like mourning souls. Snow coated the docks, and the water reflected nothing but steel-gray heavens. At the end of a narrow pier stood a man mending fishing nets under a single flickering bulb. His name was Jed Marlowe, an old fisherman with skin weathered to the texture of driftwood. His beard was a mess of white bristle, and one eyebrow arched permanently in skeptical greeting. He wore a thick wool sweater patched so many times it looked more memory than garment. His hands calloused, cracked, knotted, worked with a confidence only decades on the sea could teach. He was not a man of many words. The sea had taught him silence held more honesty than speech. "You the coal boy?" Jed asked, voice deep like pebbles grinding under waves. "Henry," he said, extending a rough hand. Jed looked him up and down the coat, the boots the soldier's posture he couldn't hide, and finally shook his hand with a surprisingly firm grip. "Your grandfather was a strange one," he said simply, "but fair." Then he nodded towards a small battered motorboat tied to the pier, and sitting there as still as a stone statue was Scout. The dog was magnificent, tall, strong fur, thick, and layered in shades of silver and storm cloud gray. His ears stood alert, and his amber-brown eyes were sharp, intelligent, and appraising. He didn't bark. He didn't whine. He simply observed Henry, judging whether this man was worthy. Henry crouched down beside the boat boots, crunching frost. He presented his hand palm up. "Hello there, Scout," he murmured, voice soft for the first time in so long it almost cracked. I'm Henry. Scout leaned forward and touched his wet nose to Henry's fingers, one gentle, measured nudge. Then his tail gave one slow thump against the boat hull. Jed smirked. He's been waiting. Henry swallowed hard emotion burning behind cold eyes. Waiting. For him. A stranger. Or maybe a kindred soul standing post alone. He stepped into the boat beside Scout, feeling the animal's warmth brush his leg like a promise. As the motor chugged to life, and Sitka's lights receded into the night fog, Henry Cole, once a soldier without a battlefield, sailed toward the place where his final duty waited. Toward a silent watch that might finally give him peace. The first dawn on Raven Ledge arrived without color, without birdsong, without mercy. The sea and sky were the same leaden shade of gray, a bleak horizon, where storms brewed silently like thoughts one pretends not to have. Henry Cole stood on the exposed cliff edge, breath turning to white vapor that vanished in the wind. His red and black buffalo-plaid flannel coat flapped like a flag of stubborn survival against the harsh Alaskan winter. Beside him, Scout, a sturdy 5-year-old German shepherd, with a thick storm-gray coat, stood alert, his ears rotating constantly, like radar dishes scanning the ocean. The dog appeared carved from determination itself, muscles coiled beneath a pelt made for the cold. Though young Scout had the posture and unwavering gaze of a seasoned sentry, he never looked away from the sea for long. Henry appreciated that. Silence had always been easier to trust than words. This rocky island was smaller than Henry expected, a jagged tooth of black granite stabbing up from icy waters topped by a wooden cabin that had lost any war it ever fought against time. Shingles rattled in the wind like loose teeth. Nails stuck out from warped beams. The windows, crusted with salt residue, reflected nothing, not even the faint light of morning. Yet Henry felt something here that he hadn't felt since before the war purpose. A silent watch. A post no one else wanted. Exactly where he belonged. Life here formed its own grim rhythm within days. Each morning before dawn, Henry and Scout would patrol the perimeter of the rock, though perimeter suggested more territory than reality allowed. Still, Henry treated the place as if it were a forward outpost. He inspected the frayed rope tying his boat to the rock. He checked for cracks in the wooden supports of the narrow landing platform. Scout took a higher vantage point, a natural lookout tower, where the ledge rose sharply, standing tall, as the Arctic wind buffeted him like a challenge. The dog's breath billowed around his head, a ghostly haze against the stone. There were times when Henry caught himself staring at Scout's quiet vigilance and feeling a kinship stronger than anything human had given him in years. They both knew what it meant to keep watch while the world slept. During the day, Henry forced his aging body through the chores required to prevent the cabin from collapsing entirely. The floors bowed in places. He reinforced them. The roof groaned. He patched it with whatever scrap lumber Julian had left behind. The old wood stove, rusted nearly through on one side, needed careful coaxing to burn. The smallest gust of wind seeped through the walls like cold fingers prying into his bones. But the work kept Henry's mind from wandering. Every hammer strike drowned out old gunfire. Every plank nailed into place silenced the echo of distant explosions he still heard sometimes in his sleep. He didn't say it aloud, but he knew Raven Ledge was therapy disguised as hardship. There were few traces of Julian Cole in the cabin's furnishings, only a couple of faded photographs and a ship in a bottle gathering dust. But Henry often felt his grandfather's presence not in sentiment or nostalgia, rather in the meticulous organization of tools in the old sea chest, or the mysterious lack of rot in certain floorboards, despite the constant moisture. Julian had been careful, too careful for a retired engineer hiding away for the sake of solitude. Henry's nights were the hardest. The sea never slept, and the storm winds howled across the cliffs like wolves hunting for warmth. Sometimes old panic clawed its way into Henry's lungs. In those moments, Scout would rise, place his head heavily on Henry's knee, and anchor him to the present. That bond, wordless yet fierce, grew stronger each hour they survived together. On the third day, Henry turned his attention to a dusty writing desk jammed against one wall. One of its drawers refused to budge, so he fetched a worn pry bar. The wood creaked reluctantly before finally giving way with a crack like a gunshot. Inside was a neatly stacked column of leather-bound journals. Their covers were darkened by age but preserved by careful storage. Julian's handwriting, small and perfectly even, filled every page Henry skimmed. This was no diary of a hermit. The journals contained detailed measurements of tides, currents, water temperature, and notations titled Songs of the Ocean, observations about low-frequency vibrations that traveled impossibly long distances under the sea. Julian had not merely lived on Raven Ledge. He had listened to it, studied it, treated the entire rock as a tool, a living instrument. That realization struck Henry like cold seawater. His grandfather's isolation had a purpose, just not one the family ever understood. Henry sat for hours, Scout curled protectively at his feet, reading about Julian's years in the Navy. Acoustic engineering, submarine detection. The tension of innovation being twisted into weapons by men who only saw destruction as progress. Julian wrote of turning away from them, of guarding the ocean's secrets rather than exploiting them. The entries became frantic near the end. Paranoia or foresight. He spoke of a watch against hunters and monsters that breathe with hulls of steel. Henry's fingers traced the lines carefully, imagining Julian's steady hands once penning these desperate thoughts. Then the storm hit. Screeching wind slammed against the cabin. The door rattled in its frame. Henry lit a fire in the stone hearth. Thick blocks of granite fitted seamlessly together, oddly pristine compared to the decaying walls. He sank into a creaky armchair, fatigue settling deep into his bones. The journals lay open in his lap, but his eyes had shifted to the crackling flames. Scout had been dozing lightly on the rug, but suddenly he jerked upright, his whole body going rigid. A low growl simmered in his throat. His nose pressed against the flat stone in front of the hearth, inhaling sharply. Henry frowned. "Easy, boy." "Probably a mouse," he muttered, though his pulse jumped. Scout dug his claws into the stone and began to scratch with frantic urgency. The scraping echoed through the small room with unsettling clarity. Henry's annoyance evaporated at the sight of Scout's eyes, wide, burned with warning. Those were the same eyes he'd once seen on dogs trained to detect explosives. Instinct screamed, "Pay attention." Henry knelt beside Scout, his old joints protesting. He slid his palm along the stone slab. It felt solid, cold, slick with age. But near the edge he felt the faintest shift, a subtle dip that didn't belong. He pressed harder. The stone moved a millimeter. His breath hitched. He grabbed the pry bar, wedged it into the seam, and heaved. For a heart-stopping moment, nothing happened. Then the slab lifted just enough to let out a groaning echo, like a subterranean whale lamenting its rupture. Henry pushed harder until the massive stone tilted up, revealing a hidden hollow underneath. The cavity was lined with lead sheets, clean dry and impossibly well preserved. Inside were two items, a waterproof oil-wrapped book and a strange brass object that looked more like a component of a machine than any traditional key. Heavy, cold, and complex, its notched cylindrical end gleamed even in the dim light. Henry carefully unfolded the book's cover. The handwriting was familiar, Julian's precise engineering script. "My name is Julian Cole. In 1973, I was honorably discharged from the United States Navy where I served as senior acoustic engineer in the Ocean Surveillance Project. Henry's heartbeat quickened as he flipped page after page. Raven Ledge, according to Julian's revelations, was not merely a chunk of forgotten rock. It was a geological anomaly, its granite heart, uniquely shaped to magnify and channel sound from deep underwater. And Julian had carved into that heart building a hidden listening post powered by the endless push and pull of the tide. Maps, schematics, notes about energy reserves, underwater turbines, and seismic signatures. The last pages shifted tone again, filled with ciphered codes, cryptic riddles and diagrams of that very brass key inserted into a circular socket and turned. Henry understood then this was no legacy of isolation. It was an assignment, a passing of the torch from one silent sentinel to another. Scout nudged Henry's elbow as if urging him forward. The storm outside roared its approval or its warning, Henry couldn't tell. But one thing he knew with certainty, his grandfather had buried a secret worth protecting. And that secret had just been unearthed. He squared his shoulders, feeling a spark of something he hadn't felt in years, a mission forming. He would decode the symbols. He would follow the instructions. Not because he was curious, because Julian trusted him. Because someone had to keep watch. Because a silent watch was never abandoned. Tonight, the hearth had offered more than warmth. It had opened a doorway to a truth that could change everything. And Henry Cole was not the kind of soldier who walked away from his post. Twilight settled early over Raven Ledge, the winter sky turning into a bruised sheet of violet and gray, as Henry Cole prepared himself for the task his grandfather had left behind. The coded instructions in Julian's journal had been clear spring tide at the dog watch late afternoon, when the ocean retreated to reveal what it usually concealed. Even nature seemed to obey the mission of a man determined to listen to what others ignored. The cold sharpened the air into glass. Snow packed itself into every crevice of the black granite ledge, and the sea hissed below like something wild and insulted. Henry's breath came out in ghostly bursts, and he tightened the straps on his worn gloves, grateful for the thick layers beneath his now iconic red and black buffalo-plaid flannel and heavy outer coat. His boots crunched against frozen seaweed as he checked the rope coiled at his belt. Old habits of preparedness long imprinted into his muscle memory. Scout led the way, his strong paws gripping the slick rock better than any boot could. The German shepherd's posture was perfect. A low center of gravity, tail rigid for balance, ears swiveling constantly to capture the faintest changes in the environment. He was built for this, a guardian in wolf's clothing, trained by instinct and hardened by solitude. Henry trusted Scout's instincts the way soldiers trust the man covering their flank without question. The descent down Raven Ledge's far side was steep and treacherous. Dark ribbons of kelp lay exposed like the outstretched arms of a mythical beast, the very formation Julian had called the Kraken's arm. Each step felt like crossing the threshold of a secret older than the cabin above, older than the military projects that once defined Julian's life. When they reached the base, they stood before the Trident Rock, a three-pronged wall of stone rising like the crown of a titan buried in the seabed. Its surface was slick with algae and barnacles reflecting little of the waning daylight. To any wanderer or fisherman, it was meaningless stone. To Henry and Scout, it was a locked door. Then Scout stopped. His nose pressed into a damp cluster of seaweed thicker than the rest. He inhaled deeply, once, twice, and then a sharp, decisive bark burst from his chest. The sound bounced strangely around the rock walls like a command word that awakened something ancient. Henry rushed to him, scraping away wet kelp until the granite showed through. He ran his fingers along the stone, feeling nothing at first. But persistence was the first rule of survival. He scraped harder and saw it a perfect circular indentation, nearly invisible beneath the green growth. Inside it was a pattern of gear-like grooves crafted with precision no natural process could replicate. His hand trembled slightly as he pulled from his pocket the brass key he had unearthed beneath the hearth. It fit into the carved socket without a fraction of space to spare, aligning like two parts of a machine, finally reunited. Henry rotated it clockwise. For a heartbeat, nothing. Then a deep vibration rolled beneath his boots, a subterranean groan that felt alive. Scout stepped closer, ears flat but unafraid. A thin line of separation appeared in the stone, tracing the outline of a massive rectangular panel. With a slow and impossibly smooth movement, the enormous section of rock slid inward, revealing a darkness so complete it seemed to consume the dim light behind them. A metallic breath of frigid dry air drifted out. This was no cave. This was engineered, planned, hidden. Henry flicked on his flashlight, the beam slicing through the void to reveal a perfectly square corridor carved into the granite. Smooth walls of reinforced material swallowed the light with an eerie calm. It felt like walking into a sealed vault that had been waiting decades for this exact moment. Scout padded beside him, silent, except for the faint tap of claws against steel panels concealed under stone. At the tunnel's end stood a naval-grade bulkhead door, the kind Henry had seen on warships long ago, complete with a central locking wheel. He gripped the wheel and turned. It spun freely without resistance, and the door opened on silent hinges, as if the mechanisms had been preserved by time rather than weathered by it. Henry stepped into a chamber so vast it took his breath away. The space was carved directly into the heart of Raven Ledge, an enormous circular room brimming with dormant technology. Rows of computer servers stood like sentinels, their indicator lights pulsing faintly yellow, waiting to become green. A sweeping semicircular control station dominated the center, polished metal and cold precision. And on the far wall, towering from floor to ceiling, was a curved display screen, dark but full of promise. Scout's paws clicked gently as he descended the small gangway along with Henry. The dog's head turned slowly, surveying the room with a seriousness that Henry recognized. They were no longer merely explorers. They were inheritors. Julian's final journal had shown Henry a sequence, a checklist of activation. His hands moved without hesitation, flipping switches protected by thick, dust-free covers. He traced wires and power channels guided by neat, handwritten annotations. Everything responded exactly as described. The generators beneath the sea turbines devouring the moon-pulled tides awakened with a resonant hum. The sound vibrated up the stone walls and into Henry's bones. It was not loud, but it was powerful, the heartbeat of Raven Ledge. Lights blinked from amber to steady green. Chilled air whirred and circulated. The room became alive. Only one step remained. Henry approached a small rectangular switch guarded by a protective cover labeled in firm engravings. Acoustic array online. He looked to Scout, who stared back with steady amber eyes as though telling him, "This is what we came for." Henry pressed the switch. The giant screen flickered. Streams of text raced upward like rising bubbles, diagnostic results, system calibrations, geolocation coordinates. Then the screen shifted to a topographical map. Wave patterns formed concentric circles radiating from Raven Ledge itself. Henry's eyes widened as the view shifted once again. Suddenly, the black emptiness of the deep ocean exploded into living color. The sonar visualization revealed the secret life of the sea. Purple ribbons, large, slow-moving ships beyond the horizon. Blue streaks flashing bright dolphins communicating in secret codes. Shimmering clouds of green beds of shrimp churning just above the ocean floor. A faint red pulse, tectonic sighs from the shifting earth beneath them. Henry staggered a step backward in awe. his stern heart dulled by decades of pain and isolation, jolted alive as if someone had reconnected a severed part of his soul. He was seeing what no human eyes were meant to see, listening to a world no human ears were built to hear. His gaze caught on a brass plaque, mounted just below the main screen, polished clean, as if Julian had placed it only yesterday. Use it to protect, never to profit. The watch is now yours. Henry felt tears prick his eyes, unwelcome but unstoppable. The old soldier had spent years trying to drown the ghosts of war in silence, only to discover that silence itself was now his duty. His grandfather had not abandoned him. He had prepared him, chosen him, trusted him with a sentinel's legacy. Up on the surface, people laughed when Henry inherited a worthless rock. But beneath that rock was a guardian station, a stethoscope pressed to the beating heart of Earth itself. And its purpose was protection, vigilance, peace. Henry placed a hand on Scout's strong neck. The German shepherd leaned against him, solid, present, loyal. Together, they were the last line of defense for a secret both powerful and fragile. For the first time since war had stolen his purpose, Henry Cole felt whole. Julian's silent watch was over. Now it belonged to Henry. The first warning was the sky. It darkened from steel to bruised purple clouds boiling over the ocean, as if the sea itself was exhaling rage. Wind lashed against Raven Ledge with claws of ice, and the tide churned into violent peaks. Henry Cole had been studying sonar patterns on the massive curved screen in the cavern, when Scout's low growl signaled a new threat, one that did not come from the depths, but from the world of men. Through a camera feed wired to a disguised periscope above, Henry saw it, a pristine white luxury yacht, cutting across the angry water like a smug grin, a blemish on nature's fury, a symbol of arrogance refusing to bow before the storm. Derek Cole had arrived. Derek emerged from the yacht wrapped in a wind-blocking jacket so new it still creased like tissue paper. Cold reddened his round cheeks, but his smirk remained fueled by greed that warmed him more than any fabric ever could. Behind him stumbled two hired enforcers, Finn and Rook. Finn was a thin man with jittery limbs, a wiry neck, and a perpetual twitch under one eye. His messy blonde hair whipped around his gaunt, narrow face, and he hugged himself against the chill. The chaos of the storm tugged at him like a bully, and fear leaked from him in every stuttered breath. He was not made for oceans or confrontation, just petty intimidation in alley shadows. Rook, on the other hand, looked like he'd been carved from a tree trunk. Broad shoulders, thick arms, and a wild beard that seemed to hold frost like trophies. His nose had clearly been broken more than once, angled like an afterthought, and a thin scar traced the left side of his jaw, a memento of violence past. But his small, restless eyes betrayed discomfort. The giant might have been fearless against other men, but the vast sea and howling winds filled him with an unfamiliar dread. Here muscle meant nothing. Nature dictated every command. Derek shouted over the storm voice, cracking with cold and entitlement. "Henry, you're going to open whatever is under that rock. Right now." Henry, still clad in his rugged red and black flannel, beneath a thick coat, stood solid near the cliff edge like a stubborn statue refusing erosion. Scout pressed against his leg, hackles rising, reading menace in each intruder. Henry's jaw hardened. They weren't here for reconciliation. They were here to take what they didn't understand. "What Julian built down there isn't for you," Henry said, voice steady, body bracing against the wind. "You won't twist it into something rotten." Derek laughed, a sound swiftly stolen by the wind. "I don't need a lecture from a washed-up grunt clinging to scraps," he snapped. "I have investors who know exactly what that military relic of a station is worth." Scout barked once, sharp and warning. Finn jumped. Rook reached instinctively for the gun holstered inside his jacket, overcompensation for insecurity, But Derek slapped his arm down. "We don't need bullets," Derek sneered. "We'll take what's ours, one way or another." As if nature itself took offense, the waves surged, striking the rock with such force that the whole ledge trembled. Snow whipped sideways, slicing the air. The world dimmed prematurely as daylight struggled and failed to pierce the storm's wrath. The creaking cabin above them groaned under the pressure. The intruders pushed past Henry, jerking open the warped door of the cabin. Brine-soaked wood moaned as gusts stormed inside. Finn and Rook began ransacking, tearing boards aside, kicking furniture out of place. They didn't need to understand what they were looking for. Derek had convinced them treasure waited. But Scout's sudden howl, long mournful and chilling, froze Henry's blood. This wasn't his usual bark of alert. This was a coded warning instinct drilled into him by Julian's careful training. When the rock breathes, seek the depths. Already the seawater seeped through cracks in the cabin floor. The structure was failing. The storm was tearing their fragile refuge apart. Henry made a split-second decision. He would not sacrifice even these undeserving fools to the sea. Duty did not discriminate. He threw aside the hearthstones, revealing the hidden shaft below. He slid into the opening with Scout, then returned, muscles burning, grabbing Derek by the arm. "Move if you want to live." The three men hesitated, but the sound of the roof beginning to rip free convinced them. Fear finally outbid greed. They scrambled into the concealed passage, slipping, cursing, panicking. Henry slammed the stone shut, just as a deafening roar collapsed the cabin above them into the sea. Silence fell. Not the silence of peace, but the mute pressure of stone, shielding them from death by inches. Derek gasped for breath, eyes bulging as the chamber lights flickered on, revealing the futuristic nerve center carved into the earth. Finn clutched his arms tightly, trembling at technology his mind couldn't grasp. Rook stood wide-legged, trying and failing to look unshaken. Henry ignored them. He rushed to the control terminal, fingers flying over ancient keys, accessing the sonar feed with precision he hadn't known was still inside him. Scout leapt onto a platform, eyes fixed sharply on the screen. The visualization was chaos noise from the storm, dominated like a cosmic drumbeat. But amid the swirling haze of sonic interference, a distinct signal pulsed. Dark blue compact moving with deliberate stealth toward Raven Ledge. A submersible. Henry's heart dropped. "Your investors," he murmured, voice thick with dread. "Who are they?" Derek swallowed hard, bravado unraveling beneath the weight of something far more dangerous than he expected. "Some private security firm," he croaked. They said governments would pay anything for tech like this." Government. Rival nations. Corporations without conscience. The predators that stalked oceans wore many flags. Henry's pulse thundered as he typed a secure code, Julian's emergency alert sequence. Through a covert channel, he sent a short encrypted message to the Navy. Coordinates: severe storm, unauthorized submersible closing in Vulture's nest compromised, immediate assistance required. He hit send. In the subterrestrial hum, they waited. Derek pacing and muttering. Finn biting his cracked lip until it bled. Rook staring wide-eyed, realization setting into his bones that money wasn't the strongest force in the world. Henry stood steady, Scout pressed against his leg, two soldiers ready for whatever came next. Above them, the ocean roared like a monster denied its prey, and beneath that chaos, a silent hunter crept closer, drawn by greed and secrets hidden too long. The storm outside was nothing compared to the storm heading straight for them under the waves. And Henry Cole, broken veteran, forgotten guardian, knew this was just the beginning. The storm died slowly, like a beast too stubborn to release its grip on the world. But even the fiercest tempests eventually exhaust themselves. Hours passed within the hidden chamber, as Henry Cole watched the chaos on the sonar screen soften into calm. Colors that once screamed across the display faded to quiet hues. The dark blue mark of the hostile submersible drifted closer, its movement sly and predatory. But then, like twin spears of sunlight breaking the ocean floor, two bright gold signatures surged in from opposite directions. United States Coast Guard cutters making a sprint through hell to protect a forgotten rock, and the broken veteran standing guard upon it. There was no sound of battle, no cinematic explosion, only motion curves and angles, pursuits and retreats, a ballet of quiet warfare. And then a halt. The submersible trapped, a predator caged. Henry stood motionless, hand resting on Scout's back, feeling the dog's steady breathing. As they watched a fight no human eye could see, only one that ears built of steel could hear. The old soldier's heart, long scarred and tired, felt something powerful flicker inside him, purpose awakening from its grave. By the time dawn arrived, the storm had loosened its claws. A cold silver light seeped through the cracks of the world, washing Raven Ledge in a soft metallic glow. The heavy stone door opened at Henry's command, and the wind greeted them like an old friend, still sharp, but no longer hungry. He climbed up the passage with Scout right behind him, boots scraping against damp stone. Derek, Finn, and Rook followed, each step heavy with the weight of what had almost been their grave. The cabin was gone. Not destroyed in pieces, devoured completely. Only fragments of lumber remained wedged into the rocks like bones left after a feeding. The sea had reclaimed what was hers. The three intruders stared, trembling, realizing how close they came to turning into driftwood. Their arrogance, once loud and shiny, as Derek's expensive shoes, now washed away by the truth out here nature alone was king. Below the ledge, a U.S. Coast Guard cutter floated with calm authority, its crew lined at attention. Armed officers climbed up with firm hands and blank faces, the kind that carried out duty without judgment. Finn and Rook were handcuffed first, their bravado finally stripped away. Derek resisted for exactly 1 second, just enough to earn himself a twisted arm and a grim reminder that consequences existed beyond bank accounts. He stumbled as they led him down the jagged path to the vessel waiting below. His expensive jacket, once a badge of superiority, now looked ridiculous, like a child's costume worn to a funeral. Before the cutter departed, another ship appeared, a slab of steel and discipline cutting through the gray water. A naval transport. From its deck climbed a man who walked like he had marched every day of his life. His posture straight, his expression composed, his uniform immaculate, even in the lingering storm mist. Rear Admiral Thomas Hayes, late 60s, silver hair, clipped tight eyes, sharp, but carrying a weary kindness, as if he had seen too much of the world, yet still hoped to protect what goodness remained. The lines on his face were not marks of age, but the etchings of secrets too heavy for speech. He reached the top and paused, letting his gaze settle on Henry, a weathered man in a red and black flannel coat, boots soaked, beard rough from neglect, eyes calm as snow-topped mountains. Scout, thick fur bristled at the presence of strangers, stood at Henry's side like a wolf carved from loyalty. Henry Cole, the Admiral, asked, one brow lifting in respect rather than doubt. Henry nodded. "I'm Admiral Hayes," he continued. "Julian and I served together. He was a peculiar man. Genius often is." His eyes traced the hidden door now sealed beneath the rock. "We always suspected he was building something out here. None of us imagined it was this." He motioned toward the invisible world below their feet, an entire station pulsing with intelligence under a worthless rock. "That system down there is decades ahead of its time," Hayes said quietly. "Still ahead even now. It cannot be abandoned. It cannot be corrupted." He stepped close, voice dropping to a tone that lived somewhere between command and reverence. "Julian chose you, not by obligation, not by blood, but by understanding." Henry listened silently, as the incoming dawn scattered thin light across the gray sea, casting sparkles onto Scout's silver-gray fur. The dog's ears flicked toward every gull cry and wave crash, as if already recommitting to the silent watch. Hayes continued, "We will offer you a special civilian contract. You remain here as guardian and operator. You maintain the array. You listen. You protect the coast." His gaze sharpened. "We can replace Wall's supply food staff repairs, but we cannot replace your eyes or that dog's instincts." Julian knew that. Henry swallowed. Memories flickered battlefields with no winners, medals that meant nothing, a lifetime spent trying to convince the world that he still mattered. Scout nudged his hand, grounding him. In that moment, Henry no longer felt like a ghost drifting without purpose. "I'll stay," he answered softly. "This watch is mine now." Months later, Raven Ledge transformed. Where a fragile hut once stood, a reinforced observation post rose anchored deep into the stone built to defy storms that would flatten ships. Steel windows shimmered against the sky. Radar dishes turned slowly, listening to the voice of the sea. Cables ran like veins beneath the rock, carrying sound and knowledge to the man who stood guard. Inside, Henry sat before the great curved screen, fingers steady over controls he once feared to touch. Scout lay curled nearby, tail thumping whenever Henry glanced his way. The quiet inside the station was no longer the silence of isolation. It was the silence of vigilance. Henry's inheritance was not wealth measured in documents or digits. It was something deeper, a mission that gave his fractured spirit a new backbone. A grandfather's faith, misunderstood by all but the one who needed it most. A companion who sensed truth beneath stone long before Henry did. Cold wind rattled the window, but inside warmth glowed. Henry ran a hand gently over Scout's head. Sometimes the gifts people mock as useless are the ones that save a life. Sometimes the family we deserve is not bound to us by blood, but by loyalty found in the darkest night. And sometimes the burden we inherit is exactly the purpose we've been waiting for. The watch had begun, and Henry Cole, flannel-clad sentinel of the sea, would not fail it. Sometimes God sends his miracles wrapped in the most unlikely packages, a lonely rock in the sea, a battered old soldier searching for purpose, or a loyal dog who refuses to give up the watch. When the world turns its back on you, remember the Lord never does. He works quietly through storms and silence through the eyes of those who stand by us when everyone else walks away. Maybe you too are standing on your own Raven Ledge right now, feeling isolated, forgotten, or unsure what comes next. Hold on. Trust his timing. God has a way of turning the things others call worthless into the very blessings that save us. And just like Henry and Scout, you might discover that the mission God has for you is far greater than the pain that brought you here. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs hope tonight. Tell us where you're watching from and let us know in the comments if you've ever witnessed a small miracle in your own life. And if you believe in the bond between people and God's loyal creatures, click subscribe so you don't miss the next story. May God bless you, guard you in every storm, and place an angel, whether on 2 legs or 4, right beside you on your silent watch.